Hello, this is Tony Rayns, and I'm here today to talk about Ozu Yasujiro's 29th film, Hijosen no Onna, otherwise Dragnet Girl. The title does mean Dragnet Girl. I think he wanted it to have a rather lurid-sounding title, make it clear that this was both Americanized and somewhat of a film offering generic thrills. Let's put it like that. His name actually appears right there under the main title, and then again as the director in just a second there. You may have caught the credit for story to one James Mackey. James Mackey is one of Ozu's many pseudonyms. And in fact, already in 1930, when he was using this name, it pops up on the credits of quite a few of his films. He wrote a short biography for the fictional James Mackey, and it goes like this. It's worth quoting. James Mackey has the smartness of his American father and the delicacy of his Japanese mother. His study has a shelf covered with intricately designed paper on which sit toys gathered from all over Japan. We worked through the night drinking Japanese wine and Bordeaux from the 1800s and listening to gramophone records of the Love Parade. Next day we met at my house where, fueled by Washington coffee, Johnny Walker, pickled squid and tea over rice, we worked further on the gags. Well, the shift there from third person to first person sort of gives it away, really. You can tell he's talking about himself, but it's a very droll persona that he invented, and it's the Americanized Ozu, or the half-American Ozu. This is the last film he made that is heavily marked by American influence. It is a clear response to American cinema, not the first of this kind, but it is the last one that he made. From here on in, all of his films are resolutely Japanese in subject. Some of the post-war films, of course, have Americanized characters in them, but those are real Americanized characters. These ones in this film are completely fantasy figures. Nobody in Japan was behaving quite like this at this time, and nobody, of course, had guns. I doubt there were many offices that were full of typewriters as well, since typewriters were used only for English language communication. You can't type in, or you couldn't at that time, type in Japanese. So, an American film, a highly American film in many ways, however, also a very Japanese film, and the conflict between those two is going to preoccupy us in the course of this commentary, I think. But the first thing I'd like to point out, and it's already a bit late to do so, is that no American film ever, even now, has begun in the way that this film began. If you think back to what you saw, it was all very quick fire, and you may have missed some of the cues, but it began with a high-angle shot looking down on a street intersection with a few figures passing, just three, I think, casting long shadows. We then cut to a window seen from inside. It has big, heavy wooden slats covering half of the space. The window is open. We infer that the view in the first shot was from that window, looking down. We then cut to two identical clocks side by side with the shadows from those window blind slats cast across them. That's the continuity. It seems very odd at first glance that there should be two clocks side by side. Nothing on the face of it could be more absurd. But we realize, looking more closely, that these are in fact the clocking in and clocking out machines for employees, and right next to them on the wall there's a rack on which people have put their cards, both for clocking in and clocking out, to keep the records of their attendance at the office. And then beyond that, and Ozu starts to explore this in new angles and then subsequently in tracking shots, there's a row of pegs on the wall, little hooks, from which the gents hang their hats. Everybody in this film wears hats much of the time, and we have to infer that this was a fashion in Japan at the time. Whether it was true for many office employees, I'm not sure, but anyway, in this Americanized Japan that Ozu is constructing, everybody wears hats. So also the offices are full of well, a large typing pool, let's say. There are lots and lots of ladies employed to type up letters, obviously in English. And the tracking shot along the row of hats, from which one mysteriously falls off, is of course matched by the tracking shot along the row of typewriters, first with women working them, second with them being covered with their oilskins for the night. We have already been introduced. I'm doing some catching up here, and I promise you I'm not going to focus on describing what we see on screen, but we've been also already introduced to this putative relationship between Tokiko, one of the typing pool, seemingly a very nice girl, and her immediate boss, not her big boss, because the big boss is this man's father. His name is Okazaki, and he runs this WBK company. We don't know what that stands for, and it's never made clear, and we don't even know what kind of business they transact, but it might be a bank, it's possible. In any event, it's a modern company with modern equipment, and he is a modern boss who has taken a fancy to this member of the typing pool. She is very plain-spoken, almost un-Japanese in her behavior and attitudes, and she, I won't say she pushes him away, but she makes it clear that she's not going to submit to him in any immediate term. The appearance of these two gents changes everything. It changes our understanding of their relationship. It changes the understanding of Tokiko's background and what she might be up to during her day job. She's putting them off from scamming Okazaki, and they do this mysterious bunk, which we see. We don't know why that would be until, from the right of the frame, in steps a policeman, implying that they have reason to be scared of the police. It may be that Tokiko also has, and maybe that's why the policeman is following her. Ozu is giving us this rather enigmatic hint. But he cuts directly to a completely different locale, something utterly unlike the office and one of the other key settings of the film, a boxing gym, the Toa Boxing Club. And the boy at the centre of the frame is going to be one of our key protagonists in the film, not one of the two leads, but one of the key supporting characters in the course of the story. He's a newcomer in the gym, or newish in the gym. And this man tipping his hat outside the door is going to be our main protagonist, along with his lady, who turns out, we will discover shortly, to be Tokiko, the typing pool girl that we've been seeing already. He's an ex-boxer, apparently a champ. And the gym owner, the man on the right here, is constantly asking him to come back, to make a comeback, try it again, return to the ring, pick up training again where you left off. And Joji's answer is, well, I'm now tied up with a woman. She looks after me. There will be references much later in the film to exactly how she looks after him, and the implication is that her relationship with Okazaki in the office might treat him like some kind of sugar daddy, which would help to support both herself and her genuine lover, who is Joji here. In any case, this joshing relationship with the gym owner and all this constant playing with the gym equipment, the boxing training equipment, that English slogan on the back wall, the manly art of self-defense, one of a series of things. You may have noticed, actually, the first of several film posters appears in the film. Outside the entrance to the Toa Boxing Club, on the wall there is a giant poster for the King Vidor film The Champ, which is of course about boxing, or about a boxer and his relationship with his son. And the other posters here are not movie posters, but boxing bout posters, I guess, famous bouts of people presumably associated with the gym. And Joji, we will see when he gets home, has a big poster for a Jack Dempsey fight as part of his wall decoration. In any event, Here we have a thriving, bustling milieu, lots of guys training. And here is Tokiko back again, but she went home obviously after work and got changed. It's clear to see because she's dressed rather differently now. And in fact, his opening line to her, "Have you got the wrong place? Do you think you were coming to a dance party?" Reflects the fact that he's actually in a gym. However, also very wittily is conflating these two milieux. As you will see throughout the film, the relationship between Joji and Tokiko, as commented on by the gym owner, is constantly seen in boxing terms. Just as a romantic clinch between them is aborted by the man calling break, just as the referee calls to two boxers who are clinging to each other. That will set a motif that the film will explore repeatedly over the next 90 minutes. People are constantly joshing little punches at each other and referring to each other in terms of dependencies or threatening to knock each other down and out. All these things permeate everyday life in this milieu, and they come from the boxing roots. Boxing, it should be said, was very new to Japan at this point. There was a famous boxer, his name was Ogino Sadayuki. He was the first real champion in Japan. And he had signed up with Shochiku, the same production company that Ozu is working for pretty much all his life, just a few years before this, and he had made a few boxing movies. He'd also started something called the Imperial Boxing Society, or in Japanese, the Teikoku Kentokai, which had an acknowledgement in the film's credits right at the start. Thank you for assistance, basically. Ogino does not appear in this film, and I don't think that Joji is modelled on him directly. I hope not, anyway. I don't think there's any implication that Mr. Ogino was a crook or a gangster of any kind. But the fact that boxing was new is extremely relevant to the film. This is a film that is it's set in Yokohama, although there is very little visual evidence of that since it was largely shot, I think, in the studio. But the intention, Ozu's intention, together with his writer and his all his collaborators, in fact, was to produce, as I said before, an artificial Japan which is highly Americanized. Right down to the fact that gangsters do little jigs and dances, often in synchronization with each other. This was a motif that was introduced in an earlier gangster film called Walk Cheerfully, made 3 years before this, also by Ozu. And he maintains it here without explanation. I think he assumes that the audience for his films has gotten used to the idea that gangsters do these little jigs and dances on the spot, like that. This one doing it, his name is Senko, and he's the sort of the funny guy in the gang, always chewing gum and usually smoking at the same time. Now, this is, it seems redundant to say so, but this is a silent film. However, it's full of sound, and the coming sequence is a case in point. Joji is going to take care of these three interlopers, and we're not going to see it. But we're, as it were, hearing it through the eyes of everybody else in the nightclub. They're all hearing it. The band has stopped playing. They're so shocked by this noise. So Senko has to get them playing again. So music has stopped and now starts again. So everybody is listening to noises off, which is Joji beating up three guys. Joji returns immediately. He has, of course, Tokiko's total confidence, needless to say. And he proceeds, as before, ordering Senko just to take them some iced water to cool them down as they recover from the knockouts he's administered. Now, all of this is sound oriented, and it's in fact from here we're going to go very shortly into one of the earliest stores in Yokohama selling 78 RPM gramophone records. And it's a store with 2 listening booths in it, and we see characters listening to discs, and we commenting on their taste in music, their suitability of the music for them or not. And that plus the fact that the nightclub band is playing here, and that the girls are all busy with their exciting new yo-yos, which are yet another new innovation that Ozu is keen to somehow, squeeze into the film somehow, just in passing. So it's a funny old world of sound inferences. So the film is almost like a talkie before talkies. Ozu was holding out against making talkies and did so for another 3 years on the excuse that his regular cinematographer at the time was developing a sound recording system for film, and he preferred to wait until that was finalized and achieved technical perfection before he started making talkies himself. Other people were by this time making talkies. In fact, Mizoguchi had done a sound on disc talkie 2 years before this, and Tanaka Kinuyo, our heroine here, one of the greatest figures in all of Japanese cinema, of course, best known for her films with Mizoguchi a bit later than this, but still here working not far from the first time with Ozu. She'd made the previous film with Ozu as well, and had appeared in a couple of his earlier student comedies in smaller parts. And she was under contract to Shochiku as well, which is why she's appearing here. But so actually there's at least one Japanese critic has said that he thought she was miscast in this film because she's such a pure character, and she's miscast as some kind of floozy, which I think is extraordinarily wrong-headed and wrong, in fact, partly because it downgrades her enormous skills as a performer. I mean, she is one of the great actresses of the screen of all time, I think. But also she's perfectly capable of playing floozies, good girls, all kinds of women. In fact, for Mizoguchi in the late 40s, she plays very common street prostitutes who are several rungs lower than Tokiko is. And the fact that she's in this milieu is, of course, a contradiction. I mean, it's odd that she would have a day job in a typing pool and a night job, night clubbing and hanging out with a small league gang boss who happens to be an ex-boxing champion. But if we can accept this fundamental double life for one character, then we have to accept that she conveys it absolutely impeccably. That she manages to be both vulgar and aspirational. She has a certain elegance, and she's capable of a certain blousiness when the time calls for it. And she can be a legitimate object of attraction for her boss's son, as well as for people in the nightclub and her partner Joji. Now let's just backtrack a bit here to the beginning of this sequence. This is Joji's apartment, of course, and these visitors, these unruly visitors, turn out to be the first of quite a lot who will be trooping into this room in the course of the film. The sequence, if you remember, began with a close-up of a white coffee pot, and the camera pivoted around it in a semicircle, as it were, to show the door in the background. This is a movement that is going to be repeated many, many times. It's one of Ozu's characteristic touches that he defines each location by some visual element that will recur, and sometimes also with a camera movement that will recur. So the track along the row of typists in the office typing pool is one such. The row of hats hanging from pegs is another one. In the dance hall, the twirling bass and the track across the musicians to the dance floor is another one. And in this apartment, the coffee pot is the key one. The coffee pot eventually disappears towards the end of the film. No spoilers here, but it's replaced by other totemic objects in the closing scenes of the film, which has a certain poignancy because Ozu has by that time built up the expectation that the coffee pot will be there, because he's shown it to us a number of times and repeated this camera movement around it. Similarly, when it comes to the motif of gramophone records, early 78 RPM records, every time a gramophone comes into the film, we start on a close-up of it, and then Ozu pulls back, usually in a direct camera movement, sometimes in a curving camera movement, to broaden out the scene. It's not an accident that this happens again and again, and it happens both in the shop, which we're going to see very shortly, but also back home when Georgie is persuaded to buy a gramophone record and brings it home and plays it at home on his home machine. So I mentioned earlier that Hiroshi, this rookie student, the black cap that he wears is a student cap, redolent of students. It could only be a student, and he's playing with it compulsively. Now stuffs it in his pocket and changes it for a flat cap, which is his gangster costume. So changing the hat means a change of identity. Now that was an example there of a scene that began with a dialogue caption. We didn't know who was saying that. It's another example, if this was talkie, that would be off-screen sound. Ozu is doing something quite provocative with film language by introducing a scene with a dialogue card. In fact, he's going to do it again at the beginning of the next scene. So it becomes a kind of recurrent trait. It's not the last time in the film either. He will do it several times. But young Hiroshi, in the business of changing his life, he's played by a young actor called Mitsui Hideo, is visiting his sister, who works in the RCA Victor shop. Of course, we know this dog Nipper from more recent incarnations. The company morphed into HMV, his master's voice, and is still around, I think, and still uses the Nipper trademark. In fact, the dog listening to a big trumpet on an old-style gramophone, with the implication being in HMV that he was listening to a recording of his own master. However, this is Ozu at his most playful, and that he fills the shop with nippers of all sizes and shapes, including a big one that Hiroshi, with his new exciting boxing persona, almost knocks over. In fact, he can't shake the gym. He's just come from the gym. His behaviour is endlessly redolent of it. But his exciting new gangster identity is also leading him to feel up the cash register, and even to accidentally open it briefly, while hiding from his sister. His sister, of course, is not pleased about this. The sister, I should say, her name is Kazuko, and she's played by a young actress called Mizukubo Sumiko, who was at that time something of an idol star. I mean, Japan has always fetishized, the Japanese audience has always fetishized very attractive young actresses, and she was a case in point. She'd begun acting only recently before this. She was also under contract to Shochiku, and she'd made her debut in a film for Naruse just a couple of years before this. I think it's her only appearance in an Ozu film, if I'm not mistaken. But she was very popular with the audience, which is no doubt why she's in the film. It must be said that she appears to be no older and possibly even younger than her brother, although she's supposed to play the elder sister. And it may be stretching things a bit to make us believe that she is in fact his caring elder sister, and in fact only carer, since their parents have somehow gone. We don't know quite why or how. But she refers to him endlessly as, he's my only brother, all I've got. We don't have anyone else to look after us. So she's assumed the role of head of the family. Anyhow, she's given him some money. He's hanging out with Senko and another guy from the gang, and they're playing dice and having fun in the coffee shop. This again is a modernist trait. Japan didn't really have coffee shops until fairly recently, so neither did it have pool halls. The cut to the pool hall was also on a dialogue caption, so once again a comment about the way that Hiroshi is changing and adapting to his new identity as a gang member, as opposed to his squeaky clean image as a diligent student before this, is being heavily emphasized, I guess it's fair to say. This westernized joint, pool is all of these things are new to Japan, and Ozu is playing on the novelty value and the foreignness, and the fact that it has all the instructions written up in English on the wall, telling you what to do, what not to do, is also redolent of the foreignness. But it also implies that they expect to have some foreign customers, and that's because this is Yokohama, which is the major port serving Tokyo and the surrounding region, and at that point in the 30s, probably the most cosmopolitan place in Japan. Japan has become increasingly cosmopolitan since the Meiji Restoration in the mid-19th century in the Western calendar. But Western fashions have been slow to penetrate everyday Japanese life until more recently, until really the 1920s, when things really begin to take off. And this film is reflecting that rather closely. Nobody was more enthusiastic about this rapid change than Ozu himself, who habitually dressed in Western clothes, Western suits, and was renowned within Shoshiku as the most westernized director on the books. Whereas other directors were keen to do traditional Japanese stories, Ozu was the one who seemed to be clamoring to make Western-style films. As I noted earlier, this is the last of them. From this point on, Ozu himself embraces a far more committedly Japanese persona and focuses much more on characters who are caught up in Japanese social conditions, economic conditions, cultural traditions. I don't think this makes him a Zen artist, a Zen Buddhist artist, as some commentators have suggested, but it does mean that he's become more serious. And if we need to understand why that might be, I think a glance at the politics of the 1930s in Japan gives us a fairly clear indication. Ozu's two closest friends were both committed left-wingers. One was the director Yamanaka Sadao, who died in China of ill health, not of fighting the Chinese, in 1937, just after making his last film and his most famous film, Humanity in Paper Balloons. The other was Shimizu Hiroshi, a fellow director at this point, and in fact the partner of Tanaka Kinuyo in the late 20s, early 30s. Shimizu had provided the original story for Walk Cheerfully, the earlier gangster film that I'd mentioned, and he and Ozu were close friends and collaborated. No, they didn't collaborate in the sense of formally working together and sharing credits, but they were close friends and saw each other's films and kept in close touch with each other for many years to come. Ozu himself never declared his politics, but the fact that he had two overt left-wingers as close friends and artistic partners, collaborators, mentors, confrères, I don't know the best word for it, suggests that he was at least somewhat sympathetic to them, to the left-wing causes at the time. But in the 1930s, certainly by 33 and coming up into 35, 36, Japan is becoming annually more militarized. The emperor is being press-ganged, they say, into approving expansion. China has already been invaded by the time this film is made. The first incursion into what we now think of as Manchuria had been made 2 years before this. And the major assault there's already been bombing of Shanghai in 32, but the major assault on Shanghai, all the non-Western districts of Shanghai, occurs in 1937, so 4 years after this. In those years, many things have changed in Japan, and the climate has become increasingly militarized. It's something that Oshima much later comments on very directly in the film Aino Corrida, In the Realm of the Senses, and Suzuki Seijun commented on it in his great film Fighting Elegy, Kenka Elegy, which is about the making of a young fascist, about why a young man turns to far-right ideologies in the climate of the 1930s. So Ozu, I think, is not responding to the climate of the 1930s in quite that way. He's certainly not becoming fascist himself, but I don't think it sharpens his affection for dealing with political matters in his films. However, it may be interesting to note that the film before he was about to start making Dragnet Girl. They were sitting down, by all accounts, to the first script read-through with the main actors, when a call came from Shochiku to make a quickie because some film had dropped out of the schedule, and just to keep their theatres running and with new film screening, Shochiku urgently needed another feature to fill a gap in the schedule. So Ozu dropped everything with Dragnet Girl, and this I think would be at the end of 32 probably, undertook a film called Woman of Tokyo, a melodrama, also starring Tanaka Kinuyo. It's a very Mizoguchi-like story. It's about a woman who basically prostitutes herself in order to support her errant son. And in the original script, which survives, the film survives in a somewhat battered form, but the original script also survives. In the original script, it is explicitly stated that she prostitutes herself not only to care for her son, but also to support, or with donations, the Communist Party of Japan. Now, that detail is not in the finished film. It was not censored out. It may well be that Ozu himself deleted it because it was inevitable it would be censored. But it's the one instance we know of where Ozu had at least planned, even if he deleted it, to include an explicit political reference in a film, something about the characters' affiliations politically. So, anyway, he made Woman of Tokyo in 9 days for Shochiku. In fact, started filming it before the script was even finished, so rushed was it. And the film is quite good and quite interesting, but although it no longer includes this passing reference to supporting the Communist Party. He then went into Dragnet Girl, which began filming, I think, in February of 33 and was finished by the beginning of April. So this was maybe a 6-week shoot, something like that. Mostly in the studio. I think most of these locations are studio constructions, but you will see that there are some sequences clearly really shot in Yokohama. So, I think by now you're getting the proof, I'm sure you've noticed this already, of what I said earlier about using certain visual motifs, whether they're just visual elements or camera movements or both in conjunction, to establish certain locales. They set up certain patterns of expectation. And this is absolutely key to Ozu's method at this time. Of course, it prefigures things he's going to do much later in his career. And it must be said, utterly unlike what American directors were doing at the time. Even the director most influential on this film was Joseph von Sternberg. Ozu, Shimizu, Yamanaka, all of them were huge fans of Sternberg. He was, I think, the single most important American director for the young Japanese cinephile directors. And they hung on his films. I mean, 70 years later, Japan was, I think, the only country in the world to publish Underworld and Dogs of New York, The Late Silence by Sternberg, as laserdiscs. And, of course, when laserdiscs disappeared from fashion and currency, they appeared again on DVD, and now undoubtedly they're out on Blu-ray. So these films have an enduring value and cultural importance in Japan, and they had it right at the time of their first release. They were seen as great towering masterworks of cinema, and were beacons. Directors like Shimazu made virtual imitations of Doctor of New York at the time. So this is in no sense a direct imitation of Underworld, although the plot does have certain things in common, and Underworld also, as it happens, begins with a shot of a clock. So I think I don't think it's a playful clock in the way that Ozu's clocks are playful, showing different times in the same office, or a slightly later time in the clocking in clock than there is on the regular wall clock in the office. But nonetheless, there may be various ideas in Underworld that took hold in Ozu's mind. However, there is a broader question of whether to go straight or whether not to go straight, focused on the heroine played by Evelyn Brent in that film. It's not quite the same as the Tanaka Kinoyo character here, Tokiko, but it's there are certain parallels, let's put it like that. I spoke earlier about the subplot about Hiroshi. His sister, as his sole carer in effect and mentor, his elder sister, is trying to steer him away from a life of crime. She is resolutely traditional. It's not just that shot of her wearing geta and kimono. She comes out to meet Joji. Joji, of course, is always in Western dress. And mostly so is his girlfriend Tokiko. This contrast between Americanness and Japanese-ness is in a way the core of the film, because as we suggested at the very outset, this is going to be a film centrally about two opposed systems. There is the underworld. It's not quite a crime-ridden underworld in the von Sternberg sense, but it does have guns, which didn't really exist in Japan in the underworld at all at this time or even now. So you have a vision of the underworld which centers on the gang headed by Joji, although we never see any of the rackets that he allegedly perpetrates, the boxing gym, and he is himself an ex-boxer, an ex-boxing champion, the pool hall, the nightclub. These are the milieu of the underworld in the film, and it is to this that Hiroshi, the kid, is attracted and keen to join. Her hero worships Joji, and he wants to be part of this exciting semi-criminal or largely criminal underworld. Kazuko represents the opposite. She represents propriety, decency, honor, strength of character, etc. And the drama is going to take shape as through Kazuko's influence on first Joji and then on Tokiko. And they are going to go to the converse of what the boy Hiroshi goes through. Hiroshi is drawn to a life of crime and solidarity, homosociality with the gang. He wants to be one of the gang. He wants to hang out with the boys. He wants to be macho and defiant and Americanized, of course. What happens to Joji and Tokiko, and I guess that you could call this a spoiler, but I'm assuming you've probably seen the film once already before listening to this, is that they want to, or they, particularly Tokiko, wants to make the opposite journey. She wants to leave crime behind and return to the straight and narrow. She wants to embrace decency, honor, and good behavior, social responsibility in some sense. So this sequence actually prefigures a film like Angels with Dirty Faces, which is the one where James Cagney pretends to be a coward in order to scare off the kids who've been idolizing him, and he's doing it as a favor to the priest who's asked him to do that, to die yalla, rather than present a kind of heroic martyr figure at the very end. This is Joji putting on a show to persuade Hiroshi that he has no place in the gang and should stop. And as you can see from the punch bag, Joji has far from left his boxing impulses behind. That shot, incidentally, of the ship in the Yokohama port, seen through the blinds of the pool hall there, is one of the very few visual indications that we are in Yokohama, and that this can't be Tokyo, because Tokyo does have a port, but it doesn't have big ships like that in it, and that's the reason that Yokohama exists. It exists to service great cities like Tokyo. In any event, we're back in the pool hall. We're still focused on Hiroshi and his future and the way he sees himself. He has decided to not stop seeing the lads, is still hanging out with Senko and the others, and hears for the first time that Joji, whom he still idolizes, has taken a shine to his sister. And also listening, we now discover, rigorously excluded by the framing earlier in the sequence, is Tokiko, whose reaction to that off-screen sound is another. It's almost like a talkie device. I mean, I keep saying this, but it's inescapable. Ozu is making talkies before he's making talkies. I mean, he's making use of unheard sound in extraordinary ways in a film like this, as if we could all hear. Here too, the shot began with that ornate ashtray and the picture of Nipper and listening to the phonograph tells us that we're back in the shop. Nipper is the image, the visual image that defines the shop, if you like, for Ozu, and keeps coming back. But we have to assume, in fact, the conversation now is telling us, but that he's listening to unwanted classical music. She's encouraging him to try out something. We don't know what it is, but it's clearly not the kind of stuff he would hear in the nightclub. And he's saying that it's not his kind of thing, it's way too high class for him, and she sees right through him. This is, I think, a defining moment in the film, because she is challenging the persona that he has created for himself. In fact, the fact that he goes to turn over the disc to the B-side is not entirely fortuitous. I think he's running away from a home truth that she's just uttered about the way he plays the bad boy. The fact that Misako from the gang, another floozy from the gang, is in the shop. She's obviously ordered, we saw that she came in with an order slip. She's ordered a record, which she's now come to collect. But she finds Joji in the listening booth, and she takes the chance to tell him that he's become boring, or soft, as the subtitle has it here. And she realizes that he's there because of Kazuko. Now, the next scene again begins with a dialogue card. Once again, Ozu is banging through this. It's as if Nipper has been listening there. Guess who? There you go. She's speaking on the phone to Tokiko, who is at work in the typing pool. And it's a phone conversation. We see both sides of it. It's clear from the dialogue on the cards who is speaking, but it's nonetheless very dynamically edited together, so that we are very much focused on Tokiko, who is dealing with the fact that Okazaki has left yet another little gift for her in her place here on the desk, and is dealing with this embarrassing phone call telling her that her this sweet innocent girl in traditional dress is having a powerful influence on her boyfriend Joji. And conversely, the other end, Misako is hanging out with Senko, the most the most playful of the hooligan types in the gang, threatening to do something reckless and damaging. And once again, Tokiko is in the position of saying, no, 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 don't do anything bad. It'll just make things worse, make things difficult. This is another gift from Okazaki, who is looking to see how she receives it, with a smile, but he has something bigger and better waiting for her in the office, and she affects to get straight back to work, get on with her work, having taken time off anyway to take the call. So, I was saying before, these two worlds come into collision in the film, and the traffic between them is two-way. There are straights who want to become delinquent, like Hiroshi, and there are delinquents who want to become straight, like preeminently Tokiko. So this pullback from the gramophone player echoes the shots in the listening booths at the shop. Here, though, it's in Joji's apartment. And the repeat of that camera movement is, I think, designed to suggest to us how the music that he's bought and brought home from the shop is having some kind of influence on him and his thinking, his infatuation with Kazuko. So Tokiko comes back pretty angry, clearly in a mood, and she responds first by turning the music off. We have to assume that this is again classical music, the stuff that he was listening to in the shop. And second, by pulling out one of the guns that is hidden in the apartment. Now, I mentioned earlier, nobody in Japan, nobody in the Japanese underworld had guns at this point, and still now they don't. Japan is still an almost entirely gun-free society. The reason that Yakuza movies are all about swords and daggers and such like is because they don't have guns. Occasionally you can get guns via the American military because the Americans maintain an army presence in Japan and Okinawa, and sometimes firearms find their way out of American bases and into the real world outside. But that's very much the exception rather than the norm, and it's only in fantasy films by the likes of Miike Takashi that a lot of people have guns, and in films like these early Ozus where characters don't think twice about having guns and using them. This is a direct reference to things like Underworld, where of course there are Sternberg's film, where there's a lot of gunfire and everybody has guns and feels free to use them, and guns, as in later Hong Kong films, don't seem to ever need reloading very much. So we have here sorry, let me interrupt myself by pointing out that we once again have this track back from the gramophone, but this time it's the one in the listening booth at the shop. And this time Tokiko has come to the shop for the first time, where she sees Kazuko knitting. The knitting is again a motif that she's going to inherit. There's a lot of people picking up ideas from each other, little motifs like this. And the next thing we know, only 2 scenes from now, Tokiko is herself going to take up knitting. I wonder how that could happen. Now here is one of the clear location scenes in the film. We are on a high vantage point overlooking Yokohama, and this conversation, this is an interesting conversation. It's sort of threatening. We know that Tokiko has a gun in her pocket. She's pulled it out and has brought it with her. When she reaches her hand into her pocket, it's already a threatening gesture from the audience point of view, although Kazuko, of course, doesn't understand about the gun yet. But Kazuko, as always, thinks the best of people from the start, and is rather dismayed to suddenly be confronted by this hostility. The scene is very beautifully played out, I think, and the language that they use in the intertitles is itself rather resonant, and Tokiko is trying hard to use politesse, to use polite language, which is a contrast with things she said to Misako earlier in the film. And to Kazuko, it comes naturally. She speaks politely all the time. That's her natural way of speech. So, when the gun comes into it, the issue comes up, would you like to shoot me? Then how about I shoot you instead? You don't need me to comment on this, but the impact here is on... Kazuko is shocked, but probably no less shocked than Tokiko is. And Tokiko responds in the most extraordinary way by giving Kazuko a kiss. We don't see the kiss. In fact, kisses are banned on the Japanese screen in 1933. So Ozu very cunningly implies it by showing only their feet. Tokiko's feet in low heels and Kazuko, as ever, in geta. It's interestingly done, cunningly done. So we only know from Kazuko's reaction what has happened, for sure. It leaves Kazuko utterly confused and baffled, but it means that Tokiko has gone through the big change in her life. Suddenly, she no longer thinks in quite the way she did before. This bridging shot has no meaning in itself. All it does is demonstrate that wind is blowing, and the wind is picked up in that shot of the ventilator turning rapidly in the same wind, I guess, outside the apartment. So Tokiko comes home, and she is a changed woman. This is one of the longest scenes so far in the film. In fact, all of the longest scenes in the film take place in this apartment, to the extent that some Japanese critics refer to this as an apartment genre film rather than a gangster film, although I think it does make far more sense to think of it as a gangster genre film, since it's so clearly marked by the American genre. And also the film is not wholly set in the apartment, so that I think vitiates the idea that this is an apartment genre film. However, it is true that the longest and most intensely emotional scenes take place in this apartment, and this is where the characters go through their most wrenching difficulties psychologically and their most far-reaching psychological changes. So the two packages she brought back, which she now tears open, are different. One contains food, mostly canned food, and the other contains wool. These are both somehow symbolic of her reinvention of herself. The cans, we should stress, are imported food. There were no Japanese manufacturer was producing food in cans at this point in 1933. This means that this is American food that she has bought for home consumption. This is a woman who has been completely frank to her boss's son, amongst other people, about her unsuitability for the role of domestic goddess. It's not her thing at all. She's useless at housework and has no interest in becoming proficient at it. So this is a measure of her self-reinvention, and her promise to start knitting socks for Georgie, which is going to have a payoff at the very end of the film. Spoiler alert. Is the first thing that she's picked up from Kazuko, who, if you remember, was doing her knitting in the RCA Victor shop. Now, Georgie is baffled and frustrated by this. He may have had some fairly positive influence already from Kazuko himself, but he is repressing it, and the behavior changes in Tokiko, his long-term live-in girlfriend, are baffling him. I think the actor's expressions adequately capture this. The frustration, the bafflement, the anger, as it turns into. And once again, he turns to his punch bag. Fortunately, he has a punch bag at home as well as the one at the gym. And as usual, when he's confronted with something frustrating and wanting to take it out on something, it's the punch bag that gets the brunt of his anger and frustration. On this occasion, though, Tokiko positions herself on the other side of the punch bag. She's, well, I mentioned much earlier that the film sees or presents its relationships in terms derived from boxing, and this is the case here, I think. The difficulties that are springing up in this relationship are difficulties that are thought of in boxing terms, at least by the man. She, I think, is not thinking of them in quite those terms now, but she's now the one on the opposite trajectory. She's trying to go straight and persuading him to go straight, to lead what she calls a decent life, give up the racketeering, and he thinks it's a joke. He doesn't take it remotely seriously, partly because he knows her and finds it hard to believe that she could have had such an overnight change in her thinking. As she says, she's never said anything like this before, so it's all very sudden. And as I said, she puts herself behind the punch bag so that it becomes a literal barrier between them, the boxing motif. And it doesn't alleviate his frustration or his anger, and it doesn't change his mood or make him more eager and willing to listen to her. So, okay, thanks to very excellent performances from these two leads, I don't think anything here needs explication. I mean, I'm not. It's not my job to tell you what's going on the screen. You can see for yourself. But I will draw attention to the way that Ozu is anticipating his own future cutting methods. This is part of the film language business or side of Ozu. Ozu became famous late in life in his post-war films for alternating between conventional eyeline matches when people are talking to each other and unconventional eyeline matches when they stare directly ahead as if directly at the camera, and the camera comes to represent the person they're speaking to, and vice versa. I did a commentary, I think, for a BFI disc of Green Tea Over Rice, where I pointed out that the way he alternated between conventional and unconventional eyeline matches was very much related to the sincerity and impact of the emotion behind the words. Everyday courtesies and standard chatter with no great meaning behind it, can be dealt with in conventional eyeline matches. When people are speaking, opening their hearts to each other, that's when they look directly at the camera, and the camera becomes the surrogate cutting point. The camera's gaze becomes the gaze of the other person in the conversation. So the same, you can see the roots of that in a sequence like this. Much of this sequence is done in conventional eyeline matches, when they look at each other, when they talk to each other, often not next to each other or even particularly near each other, but across the room. Their eyelines do match. Ozu constructs in the usual Western format eyeline matches that make sense of everything. However, when things become intense, you'll notice that he instead goes for frontal close-ups, that they address the camera, as it were, as if the camera were the other person. This is prefiguring his post-war method. It's not exclusively post-war. He's already doing it by the end of the 30s, I think. But it's fully developed as a method of constructing sequences, the way he uses his particular film language in the 1950s. So, but here are the roots of it. And again, there is nothing remotely like this in Hollywood films of the time. So, although this is a film that could not have been made without the example of Hollywood behind it to trigger it, the result is anything but an imitation Hollywood film. This is, if you think of what was being made in Hollywood in 1933, nothing remotely resembles this. Now, once again, the spinning bass becomes the key intro to the nightclub, this time with a couple of saxes at the end of the band. And this time, this is Tokiko depressed about having walked out uncertain what to do next. Joji is also there, but sitting far apart from her at the bar, where he's about to start breaking glasses. So they're on opposite sides of the space and in their own little worlds. However, Tokiko has relief, because who should turn up to take her away from all this but Mr. Okazaki from the office, slumming it in this kind of a nightclub, presumably chasing her. It's not clear how or why. But in any case, he's here to bring her away, to take her out of this milieu and back into his world. The bartender here, incidentally, I don't know his name. I should know his name, but you will recognise his face from other early Ozu films. He's obviously a Shochiku contract player. I must have to say that I think he's brilliantly cast. It's a perfect face for the role. And this banter with Georgie is an ingeniously constructed little thing, especially his expression of bafflement and shock. It's a little piece of business that must have been in the script, I guess, but the way it's staged and played under Ozu's direction is again a little gem, I think, of a sequence. Or it's not even a sequence; it's a detail within a sequence. And the way the bartender steps back stands well clear of what he surmises is coming, and sure enough, it is. He shows us only the breaking of 6 of the glasses, but we know that he asked for 10, and we can assume that the other 4 meet their demise as well. Meanwhile, Tokiko is smoking. Everybody smokes, of course, in this film, and it's about this point that Okazaki turns up and catches her eye. Now, the Okazaki is an interesting case. He, when we saw him at the beginning of the film entering the office, he comes in at 3:30 or 3:40 in the afternoon, depending which clock you believe, and it seems kind of late in the day, and his father has not shown up at all at this point, his father being the senior manager. We never see the father, so maybe he never comes into the office. So Okazaki swans in mid-afternoon, not that long before closing time, to just check the mail and flirt with Tokiko. But seems on the whole a decent man. He's not a rapist. He's not a misogynist. He doesn't seem to have. I mean, he definitely has intentions towards Tokiko, but he doesn't seem to be set on seducing her in an indecent way. And he's not. I mean, he's giving her gifts. He's treating her very considerately, and he's undeterred by all of her protestations of unsuitability. The fact that she's, she has expensive tastes, she has no domestic skill, she has no interest in other people really. She's basically selfish, she's basically inconsiderate. All of that she's saying to be shocking, and he refuses to be shocked. He is finally shocked by her, spoiler alert, at the end of the film, when she returns to this line, and as in throughout Ozu, little happens in the film without a payoff later. He's either setting up a pattern that he expects you to recognise, and when it recurs, when it comes back again, or he's planting a line that he wants you to remember when he does a variation on the line later in a different context. And in this instance, it's a question of Tokiko shocking Mr. Okazaki. He thinks he's doing well with her, but she is still hesitating. And as you see, she goes over to the window to look out. Now, what she sees, I mean, this apparently is where Okazaki lives, and what she sees opposite, beyond this smoking chimney, is another window with a white coffee pot in it, which of course reminds her of the white coffee pot in Joji's apartment. And I think Tanaka Kinoyo's face says it all here. She's very adept at using her face, using her expressions to explain her thinking and her psychology. She has changed her mind. The coffee pot has done it. She's decided to back out of this situation and leave him standing. She has no gratitude or sympathy for him. She just has a little nod, a little bow to say goodbye and walk out. He is devastated, and the camera even goes outside the window to where that triggering coffee pot was, to show him slumped back in his chair, smoking, baffled. And here is the coffee pot that she was reminded of, now festooned with bits of wool and string from the row earlier. The place is in quite a mess, actually. There's a lot of stuff on the floor because of the bad behaviour of both of them. She cleared the table, swept stuff onto the floor so that she could open her suitcase, and he started throwing things at her. So one way and another, there's been a lot of debris on the floor. In fact, there was even a tracking shot from the fallen shoe. He threw a shoe at the door after it closed behind her, and the camera tracked slowly across the floor to explore all that debris that was cluttering the place up. This is not quite like all those paper streamers that are ankle deep in the climactic ball of Underworld, Sternberg's film, but it's still a complete change from the image of this apartment that we saw earlier in the film, in earlier scenes of the film. And it symbolizes, in some sense, the disarray in this relationship, caused entirely by the cross currents, the fact that she is eager to go straight, he has been tempted by this very same thought, but is repressing it and rejecting it, and she walked out. She has now come back. He doesn't know what to say. She's trying to make him jealous. He doesn't feel like responding to that provocation, and it's a psychological drama. Once again, I draw your attention to the question of the eyeline matches. It's part of the film's language here, film language. Also is using conventional eyeline matches, looking slightly off screen for much of the time, and then occasionally when things really get intense or really people speak with true deep sincerity, their gaze is frontal. It's directly at the camera representing the other person, and vice versa. Now, Tokiko is becoming quite desperate, having sampled what Okazaki had to offer by going back to his place with him, but then being pulled back, as it were, by the coffee pot. Well, this line says it all. I need you to love me more. She wants to be with Georgie, but she wants a different kind of relationship with Georgie. So there's the film's drama in a nutshell. As I said earlier, it's going to be echoed in a way by the conflict between Kazuko and her younger brother Hiroshi. Hiroshi drawn to the dark side, Kazuko staying resolutely on the side of good and purity. So this, I guess you would have to say, is the core of the film. The film obviously could not be, for censorship reasons, a film espousing criminality. Ozu is having a lot of fun with criminal motifs and criminal behaviour in the film, although he doesn't show Joji's racketeering. I mean, we don't ever get any clear sense of what exactly this gang gets up to in order to make money and extort money from other people. I mean, the only instance of that we see is when Hiroshi basically steals from the till in the RCA Victor shop and extorts money from his sister. But This reunion scene, interrupted first by Kazuko and then a bit later by Hiroshi himself, brings the two central dramas of the film together into the same space. She's looking for Hiroshi, who has gone missing, and she has walked in the middle of their conflict between how their lives should be. This, I think, is the longest scene in the film, by a few minutes. It runs just over 13 minutes, I think, and I think it's the emotional core of the film, and it gives both the lead, in fact, all four lead actors, it gives fantastic opportunities to. Ozu was ever sensitive to the abilities and performances of his actors, and he was at pains to serve them as well as possible. Oka Joji, who plays Joji, I don't think he had any real-life boxing background, but he was a very, very long-standing leading actor in Japanese films. I mean, he was about 30 years old when this film was made, just under 30. But he went on to have a career right through to the much later post-war years. He didn't die until 1970, and he has well over 100 leading man credits in film. Never again for Ozu, I think. But clearly he's here because he was under contract to Shochiku at this time, and Ozu picked him out for the role. Tanaka Kinuyo, playing Tokiko, is, we noted already, is one of the great screen actresses in Japan. She's also only the second woman in Japanese cinema to turn director, and she directed 5 features in total. She's a little younger than Oka Joji, born in 1910, I think, and she outlived him by 7 years, dying in 1977. But she's best known nowadays for her association with Mizoguchi. She's in lots of Mizoguchi films from the wartime period onwards, and particularly the series of feminist films of the late 40s and the historical dramas of the early 50s. They eventually fell out in 54 because she wanted to turn director, and Mizoguchi, who was then the chairman of the Directors Guild of Japan, took steps to stop her from doing so. Which seems like a particularly anti-feminist gesture. His motives were never explained or clarified, and he never wrote about it or said anything publicly about it. But it was enough to upset her into ceasing their long-term collaboration, so they never worked together again. The director, Shindo Kaneto, who had once been a screenwriter for Mizoguchi in the 40s, turned director himself, an independent director, one of the most independent directors in Japan in the 50s. Shindo made a documentary after Mizoguchi's death called There Was a Director, The Life of Mizoguchi Kenji. And he spent the last 20 minutes of it interviewing Tanaka and trying to get her to admit that she had had an affair with Mizoguchi. It's very tabloidy stuff, and I found it pretty distasteful personally, but there were persistent rumours that she had had some kind of personal relationship with Mizoguchi. In any case, she's definitely closely associated with him in those mature years. She's not similarly associated with Ozu, but that's partly or largely, I would suggest, because, well, they worked for different companies later on. Although Mizoguchi was also predominantly working for Shochiku and its subsidiaries, but also because Ozu discovered Harasetsuko, and Harasetsuko became his preferred young lead actress in many, many films of the 40s, 50s. So he had perhaps no further need of Tanaka. But he greatly supported her shift to becoming a director. In fact, he scripted one of the 5 films that she directed. So, I spoke earlier about the other couple. The boy Hiroshi, played by Mitsui Hideo, is a familiar face in other Ozu films of this early period. He's in he's the son, for example, in A Woman Should Be Loved, and I think he appears in a couple of the student comedies as well. This is probably his most challenging role for Ozu. Not a totally challenging role because he doesn't have all that much to do, but I think he acquits himself more than capably, as does Miss Mizukubo, playing his sister, who, as I said, I mean, partly because perhaps she got her first break from Naruse. She's more of an actress than you would expect from an idol star, somebody who was being promoted as a pin-up for young fans, particularly young girl fans. Her image of Japanese demureness was, I think, her main selling point, but she clearly is perhaps not as much of an actress as Tanaka Kinuyo is, but she certainly holds her own in their scenes together, and she is capable of substantial nuance in her performance, whether she's worried about her brother or whether she's approaching the intimidating figure of an ex-boxing champion and now a gangmaster. Anyhow, she's not because she's not in the scene anymore, she's been and gone, she's not witness to this further performance where Joji brutally rejects, having rejected the sister earlier, Kazuko, now rejects Hiroshi too. In both cases, Tokiko is seemingly more sympathetic, but Joji puts on a show of brutal indifference and a lack of care for the two of them in order to try and concretize the break. But having done that, he breaks the news that he's ready to do one last job before he goes straight. And Tokiko can barely believe it, and in any case thinks it's unnecessary. Why would you do that? Well, ironic, since she is the one who's demonstrated empathy and concern for this brother and sister who've both just visited them, in a way that while he has demonstrated or performed a kind of indifference and hostility to them. But now he says he wants to target his one last job at helping them, which I guess reveals his true colours. She can't quite understand it. But she, as we will see in just a moment, is the one who has the bright idea and whispers it to him. So we're kept in suspense. This is not, I would say, a suspenseful film on the whole, but Ozu is not at all above using suspense when it suits his purposes, and he doesn't want us to know in advance what it is that Tokiko comes up with. So I'm not going to go against Ozu, and so I'll leave you to discover as well if you haven't yet seen it. Here, the revelation that their past relationship has been based on lies and fakes, that what he persuaded her was an expensive gift, it turns out he now admits is a fake piece of jewellery. But that little whisper was enough to shock him and please herself and trigger her fantasy of a new life for the two of them in a future to come. Things don't, well, as we will see, I'm not going to get ahead, but as we will see, it doesn't work out quite like that. But here we have a display of togetherness, domestic togetherness. She tries to fill the coffee pot, the crucial coffee pot, the coffee pot that means so much somehow, and here the punch bag swinging, the gramophone being wound up to play the music, everything comes together, and it's bolstering her fantasy of a new life in a different environment, somewhere far away from these city streets, and somewhere where life is pure, simple, sweet, and living in harmony with nature. You remember that shot? It wasn't quite the same before. It was the other way round. The blind was on the other side. But it's going right back to the beginning of the film. It tells us instantly that we're back in the WBK office. And it was followed, of course, as it was at the beginning of the film, by a shot of the clocking in and out machine, the two clock faces side by side, and that rack of employee cards. She, knowing her way around this space, comes in the back way, doesn't have to go through the office to approach Okazaki. She can take the door straight in from the corridor. And he's pleased to see her. She you remember, walked out on him from his apartment a couple of scenes ago. So here she is back again, but on different terms. He would certainly be very surprised. Not least because nobody in Japan had guns. Anyway, the typing pool carries on regardless. In other words, life goes on outside at the outer office. It's 3:30, about the time it was when the film began. But she's carrying out a hold-up. I think they've left it this late because they know that Okazaki doesn't come into the office until mid-afternoon. I mean, towards the end of the working day. And this flunky, who was the one who took the coat, took the hat for Okazaki when he arrived at the beginning, and who leered when he was asked to fetch Tokiko in a very lubricious kind of a way. This rather obnoxious flunky is of course echoed by Joji's right-hand men in the gang. When Joji takes his coat off, he hands it without even looking to one of the other gang members to take it and hang it up. And he behaves more like Okazaki than you might expect in certain respects. They both have leadership presumptions, you could say. But in this particular case, this is the one scene where the two of them appear together on the screen in the same scene. I mean, they were both in the last scene in the nightclub, I guess, but never side by side or in proximity to each other. But anyway, he is the one who is told, with a piece of off-screen, what we would think of as off-screen dialogue, where it's a talkie, that we want cash, we don't want a check, so don't let him write a check, there's no point in that, we just need cash. And it's clear that she doesn't empty the wallet, she doesn't take everything, she just takes what they need. And she's very polite about it, and offers some helpful little advice at the end. And their getaway is clean because they're both armed. So the flunky has to move over to the desk, so they're both in the same line of fire, and they can get away down the corridor outside that door, and if anybody tries to follow them, there will be a gun waiting to meet them. So that's their getaway. And here is the line that recapitulates her earlier attempt in his place to shock him. She said, "Now you're shocked. You weren't shocked by my selfishness and my lack of domestic skills, but you're now shocked by my prowess with a gun." Now, Ozu, you could say this shot even looks forward to Wim Wenders of all things. This is, mentioning Wenders, of course, is because he was an Ozu fanatic, but what the Ozu he loves is the later Ozu, not this young Ozu. I don't know if he's even ever seen it. But that long shot of the streets of Yokohama receding in the rear, in the reflection of the back of a headlight on a taxi. Of course, headlights in those days were raised up; they weren't built into the body of the car, so you were able to have this. Ozu was clearly fascinated by it and uses it twice, the shots, and holds it for quite a long time because he just likes the way it looks. It's a visual thing that he finds appealing. Ozu has clearly chosen locations here in Yokohama because of the English language signage. You think that everywhere you go in this particular neck of Japan, everything is written in English. Every pool hall has the rules painted up in English on the wall. Every boxing gym has watchwords painted on the wall in English, and so on and so on. So it seems like every company that they go past here has signage in English as well. Anyhow, we're going to where Kazuko and Hiroshi live. Both of them are in high dudgeon, but you don't need me to explain what's going on here. It's all entirely clear, except that the crucial moment, the handing over of a little gift into Hiroshi's hand, takes place off screen. Ozu cuts outside to the outer room, and to the corridor, and he says, Georgie says essentially the same thing to the two of them. He tells them that they love each other and that they should take good care of each other. And it's only after all these things have been said and pats have been given, and he makes his speedy getaway, that Hiroshi realizes what he's holding and takes him dashing to the window to watch Joji make a getaway. These are 100 yen notes. The yen was worth quite a lot more in 1933 than it is these days. Nowadays it's about 150 to 200 to the pound and 100 or so to the dollar, the US dollar. Back then, 20 yen prize for winning a boxing bout was a big deal, made you rich. So, this is the last we're going to see of Hiroshi and Kazuko. So their drama is now played out, and Joji has performed what we might think of as his Robin Hood act. He has robbed from the rich to pay off the poor, and by doing that has turned around the lives of Kazuko and Hiroshi. You'll notice that his suitcase has replaced the coffee pot as the pivot around which the camera turns now that we're back in his apartment, but it's the same camera movement, just a different foreground object. The coffee pot is still there, of course, and in fact can be drunk from directly, but the suitcase is the key thing now, because she has been asked to prepare for their speedy getaway. But it turns out that she has been doing no such thing, or at least not for herself. One of the suitcases is empty. The other one has a bit of clothing in it, but not so much. Just to get it out of the way, Joji has spotted cops arriving downstairs. Ultimately there will be 6 of them, 7 of them maybe. 3 to begin with, and then the numbers will swell as the place becomes an object of police concern. One of the cops is played by Ryu Chishu, who will become Ozu's favourite actor. In fact, he's now dead, sadly, but Ryu once said that he thought he had made at least a walk-on appearance in all of Ozu's films except one. He didn't say which one he wasn't in. But in this film, he's one of those policemen. In fact, he's given a little bit of business at the very end of the film, which is singled out specifically for him. In most of the early Ozu films, he has this kind of small walk-on part, several times playing a policeman, as it happens. But of course, in later films, Tokyo Story, where he's the patriarch, and most of the later films, he plays patriarchs and senior figures. Because of course the roles he plays match the real life age that he has by that point. Anyhow, I wanted to draw attention to his appearance in the film because it's almost totemic for Ozu. Ozu features him in kind of like the way that nowadays Albert Serra uses Louis Serrat, the big fat guy, in every single film and installation that he makes. Some directors have fetish actors, and Ryu Chishu, who is there on the right in the doorway, coming towards the camera, has that role in Ozu's mind and eyes, and it is aesthetic. When Wenders made a rather terrible documentary about Ozu, he made an interview with Ryu Chishu as a sort of act of homage, I guess you'd say. And actually, when Paul Schrader made his film Mishima, he also wanted to pay homage to Ozu in some way, and he did it by casting Ryu Chishu as the abbot of the Temple of the Golden Pavilion, but ended up cutting out the scene. So it actually, I think it may be available as an extra on some disc editions, but it's not in the main body of the film itself. Anyway, he became, thanks to Ozu, he became one of the best known of all Japanese actors internationally. Now, that's Ryu again, hearing the noise. Now, we're into the suspense part of the climax of the film. We've seen the nightclub, the flashy nightclub. It's the subtitles don't seem to bother to translate it, but it's actually called Club Toothpaste. An evocative name, I feel sure, but once again redolent of imported goods. Japan, I don't think, was producing toothpaste at this point of its own. It was a habit picked up from the United States. Anyhow, the athleticism of these two as they jump from the first story down to the street level without breaking any legs is quite something. But the situation is complicated by A, the police, and B, Tokiko's determination to persuade them to turn themselves into the police and to give up and to go straight. So she sensibly tries to break her fall in advance, but she has no hesitation jumping even in slight heels, which is quite impressive, I think. In any case, as you will see, she tries to hold back as much as possible, but he's the one who drags her forward. Now, the police by this time are presumably blowing whistles and calling colleagues, and their numbers are beginning to escalate. And as we will discover, they end up with something like 7 of them in total. But the dynamic of the situation is entirely that he wants to get away, and she not only wants to go straight, but wants to serve jail time to give them a clean break with the past and a new start. And she insists it will be only a couple of years in jail. The subtitles are rather vague about it, but in Japanese, in the intertitles, it says 2-3 years repeatedly. So she thinks they'll get away with a 2-3 year sentence for basically for armed robbery in the WBK office. That's the one crime that can be pinned on them. Anyway, this is, as I said, it's briefly at least a suspense sequence, but I think clearly the suspense means less to Ozu than the emotional dynamic of the drama between the two of them, between her determination that they should surrender to the cops and then go straight, and his determination to get away. He seems to have broadly accepted the idea of going straight. He just doesn't want to have the 2-3 years in jail first as the interlude before he goes straight. He wants to go straight into the straight life. So once again, there's an avoidance of in what I'm not going to describe anything that happens, but I'd like to point out that when they end up embracing at the end of this sequence, before the police come to handcuff them, also avoids the kiss, which is anyway illegal on Japanese screens in 1933, and focuses more on the lower part of their bodies and on their hands and arms around each other. And this is incidentally the only point in the film where Georgie actually hits Tokiko in anger and frustration. A very shocking moment, actually. And it's what provokes her into retaliation. the one time she actually fires a gun. Don't worry, it's just a flesh wound, and it hasn't put him permanently out of action, and certainly hasn't crippled him or anything. She's a good shot, good at aiming. She just wanted to make sure he didn't get away. So, having achieved that, she now wants reconciliation. Please forgive me. Please don't think bad of me. As I said, it resolves into a clinch, and presumably a kiss, although Ozu is not allowed to show the kiss. It's a film, a fantasy. The film has presented a vision of an Americanized Japan which did not exist. It's frankly imaginary, and everybody watching it knows that. For many people, this is hugely appealing. As I said earlier, Yamanaka Sadao, the great director, loved this. He was apparently able to quote all the dialogue from the film. He had it all by heart and loved the film so much, loved these characters so much, that he took the whole thing to memory. But I think it's Ozu films were not big popular hits at this time, but in fact they probably were never very big popular hits. But these early films, the genre films like the student comedies, the melodramas, and these gangster films, seem to have done quite well. They were certainly popular with other filmmakers, and but they were recognized as fantasies. They offered a vision of Japanese life, or Japanese characters living a kind of life that was not remotely realistic. It may have been inflected by genuine Japanese concerns. So if you remember in the last long apartment scene, he spoke of a man's duty being important to him. A man is defined by his sense of duty, his strong sense of duty. In the intertitle, the word he uses is giri, which means more than just duty. It means a real sense of moral obligation, touched by or informed by a sense of humanity, the humaneness. And it becomes the watchword of Yakuza films of the 1960s, all those Takakura Ken films and the like that Toei used to make in the 1960s before things turned ultra-violent and very amoral. And it was actually, more recently, it was the title of a BBC series, a television series, co-production with Japan, with lots of Japanese scenes and characters. So giri is an important concept in Yakuza cinema, and Ozu is prefiguring it in a sense here. Joji feels that kind of giri guiding his action. It's what leads him to that Robin Hood show of robbing the rich, Okazaki, to pay off the poor who have sinned, Hiroshi and his sister Kazuko. So the police wrapping up of the case here, the handcuffing of the two, pulling them apart. We haven't seen their faces, which is important. Frisking them for the gun, picking up the purse. We don't know this cop, he's just an extra, the one who has actually carried out the arrest. But here is Ryu Chishu with another of the extras playing one of the other cops as they're being led away. And as you'll see, more cops have now shown up. So the squadron of police is escalating rapidly here. And once these two have been taken off into custody, Everybody's done for the night, I think. They're assuming that everything is all clear to go home and clock off work. You remember, this is a film that began with people clocking on to work, or at least the apparatus which enabled them to do so. And here is Ryu Chishu finding a strange object on the street. It's a child's sock, knitted. Well, who was doing knitting recently? I think it was Tokiko. Why was she knitting a child's sock? Is she looking ahead to the time when she has a baby? Is she pregnant already? I don't think so. There's no indication of that. But maybe she's thinking ahead to the bright future she'll have with Georgie when they start their new life. At the point she was doing the knitting, she wasn't expecting to have a 3-year jail term as part of it. And she was looking ahead. You see, the wool, even the man in the left to look after the apartment found the wool, threw it away. And we noticed for the first time this plant in the windowsill. And for the first time ever in Ozu, a time-lapse shot. It dawns. The future is bright.